Welcome to our program for today. There's a couple of things I want to start off with in terms of representing where we are in this day and time and in this episode. I'm going to start with a quote by Francis Schaeffer, which he made in 1972 about his present generation there. He said, and I quote, I've come to the conclusion none of us in our generation feels as guilty about sin as we should, or as our forefathers did. American Presbyterian apologist Francis Schaeffer. Hello, welcome. This is Dennis Coffin, and this is my perspective on the last word for today. I've been trying to develop some sense of conversation to awaken us to some things that we have been talking about for some time. I want to put up the issue of where we are, and I've been wanting to make sure that we keep this completely in our system. That is the 3 points of discussion that we've been doing for the last 6 or 7 episodes now. Our faith, our family, our finances. I haven't gotten off the faith principle. I have been sort of keeping that reserved and working on how we develop our faith. And then, of course, moving to the issue of our family and then working on our finances. Perspectives are opinions, and that's where I am today in terms of looking at where our opinions lie, how we develop those opinions in terms of who we are, where we are in the body of Christ. I think it's important and primarily important to find out what we're going to do and how we're going to develop those things, but more importantly, to develop what I call a Christian worldview. And we've been talking about several worldviews over the last couple of days. Primarily, the last 2 days, we've been talking a lot about a postmodern worldview. I'm going to get to a current worldview shortly, but I kind of sort of outline 5 worldviews, and we'll get to those in a little bit. But let's talk about a Christian perspective. What does that mean? What do we mean by having a Christian worldview? Well, I guess we need to really go back and define the word Christian. It comes from the Greek word Christianos, which is derived from the word Christos or Christ, which means anointed one. A Christian then is someone who is a follower of Christ, the claimer of the anointed one. The first use of the word Christian in the Bible is found in Acts 11 and verse 26. And the disciples were first called Christians in Antioch. And it's only found 2 other times in the scriptures, Acts 26 and verse 28 and First Peter 4:16. It became to be known as what we call ourselves externally, what they called us, internally, what we have developed to call ourselves. Labels don't mean as much as substance, and I think that we need to develop that idea that it is our substance that's most important, not so much the label. Sometimes we get caught up in labels and we miss the whole idea that it isn't really the labels that make us who we are, it's the substance behind the labels. And so we've been arguing over labels for centuries in terms of who we are in the body of Christ. The original Christians called themselves disciples, peoples. They call themselves people of the way. We've gotten to the point in classifications coming out of the Middle Ages that we call ourselves by labels. We're not just Christians anymore, but we are evangelical Christians. We're Pentecostal Christians. We're denominational Christians. We're sacramental Christians. We are non sacramental Christians. We are denominational. We are non denominational. All of this, when you start talking about Christianity, gets confusing because we really don't know where we are and what we're talking about, who we are in terms of our relationship. Well, perspective on this. is varied because all we have been such labeled Christians, and so we argue over our labels. This label's right, that label right, but now we're confronted with a generation that doesn't want to be labeled at all. And so peeling back labels and finding structure is the idea of where we are. Structure. Wow. I think it's important that we go there, we find our department and stay in it. Well, let's look at these worldviews again. Let's look at the worldviews. Where are we going at in terms of how we structure? I basically kind of outlined five basic worldviews, and this can be something that you can see diversifying because as we change the multicolored people who don't want to be identified by labels, we're getting to the point that we're seeing and beginning to look at a labelless generation today. That's where we are. We keep trying to restructure generations from 40 years to 10 years. There seems to be a shifting in the economy and in society so that people who are humanists, people who are looking at postmodernism or pantheism, uh, many viewpoints, or spiritualism. And when I'm talking about spiritualism here, I'm not talking about religious spiritualism. I'm talking about those who find an inner spiritual connection and begin to deal with their experience with spiritualism and dreams and visions and concocting where they think they are in terms of spiritualism. And then finally get into a particular understanding of a Christian worldview. That being said, I want to focus again on the postmodern mindset because it's a mindset that we're raising a generation of people who want nothing to do with where we are in terms of structured church, structured relationships. And so labels are coming off. A labelless society. We developed two groups in the last few years that have structured us into some things that we really need to understand how that goes in terms of labels. First of all, there are the nuns, groups called the nuns. About 20 years ago, they were a small part of our society. Today, they're a large part of our society. These are nuns, people who don't identify with any particular Christian label. They say they believe God, but they don't want to be labeled by any particular denomination. So they call themselves the nuns. They become so pronounced that the Democratic Party, in terms of our politics, have acknowledged this group of people, that they are people who call themselves nuns. Uh, what do they mean? Generation of people who won't call themselves Catholic, Protestant, Pentecostal, Baptist, no particular labels. They accept the fact that they believe God, but they don't accept any type of label. Then, along with the nuns, there are the non denominational. In fact, the largest growing church in society right now are non denominational churches. What do you mean by that? Churches who are not affiliated with no central form of government, who don't take accountability to any system, any synods, or any denominational heads or any governing authorities. They self-govern themselves. So there's a large group of non-denominational churches that are emerging. Something is wrong in our society. I think in terms of looking at that, get to this point, Joshua 24 and 15 almost make you want to shake your head. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Joshua becomes the end of his generation, looking back, trying to struggle with the generation. I feel that way sometimes in terms of after 60 years of struggling into the faith, understanding where we are, how much progress is being made in the body of Christ is where we are now. Back to this mindset. What happens? There's a religious mindset, there's a Christian mindset, and we really have a problem understanding where we are, what we're doing, how we relate in this whole issue. So it comes to the fact that what really is salvation? How does our faith fit into all of this? How do we gather ourselves into some sort of synergy so we can develop who we are? Well, let's talk a little bit more about this describing a postmodern mindset. What do we mean by that? Let me put it up for a few minutes. The term was coined again in 1979. Human discovery and science have been undermining religious certainty since the 16th century. So the modern era has been around since post-Renaissance. Those you are history buffs or know a little bit about. I'm talking about when I talk about the Dark Ages, the Renaissance, the European struggle of reaching out and discovering other civilizations, other other countries and inventions, and finding out their history, finding out where we develop in terms of our faith, where we are to this discussion. I don't know. Maybe we haven't really seen it. I guess I better structure here. So, describing postmodernism, we're into a point now that there are no certainties, no labels. We're not certain about science. We find holes in that. Science was supposed to give us discoveries and to find out what things are. Why do we do this? Why is this happening? We can't even trust science anymore. We can't trust human progress. This is a postmodern mindset because there are no labels. We adjust to information rather than inspiration. And so there's always, we get these myths about true preposition. So we question, and mostly religious troops claims are not really what we think should be. So we're in a society now who trusts information above revelation. And so there is no particular revelation because the mighty, almighty epistemology of the day is information. Information is not coming from the Bible any longer. For John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life, Jesus says. Now, information is on the internet, it's on YouTube, it's on Google, it's in the classroom of higher learning. So, value information, whether that information is true or false, determines what I decide to believe about it. My worldview is most important how I see society. I'm not going to let anybody tell me how society should be seen. I know how I want to see society. It is plural. I'm leaving this episode because I think it's so important that we begin to think about where we are, who we are, what we're doing in the body of Christ. This is the last word for the day. Jesus is the way, the truth, the life. See you next time.